Ako, si Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. ay taimtim na nanunumpa bilang Pangulo ng Pilipinas. I am here not to talk about the past. I am here to tell you about our future. A future of sufficiency. Pinakinggan ko ang tinig ninyo na ang sinisigaw ay pagkakaisa, pagkakaisa, pagkakaisa. We are Filipinos. One nation, one republic, indivisible.
Time for today's biggest headlines. I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. After 36 years, another Marcos has taken his seat in the palace. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. took his oath at the National Museum earlier today.
For a recap of what happened, mobile journalist Julie Baiza is reporting to us live from the National Museum in Manila. Julie, how was the mood like during Marcos Jr.'s inauguration?
Robbie, Gretchen, it was a festive mood here in Manila as now President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. takes his seat in Malacanang.
Ako, si Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. ay taimtim na nanunumpa bilang Pangulo ng Pilipinas.
It is now official. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is the country's 17th president after taking his oath at the National Museum on Thursday. Marcos Jr. was accompanied by his wife, Attorney Liza Araneta Marcos, and their three sons, Sandro, Vincent, and Simon. The inaugural ceremony began with the singing of the national anthem.
Aming ligaya na pagmay mga api ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Followed by an ecumenical prayer. There was also a 30-minute military civic parade. Also joining the parade were members of different sectors like OFWs, medical frontliners, laborers, fishermen, and farmers.
Of the Republic of the Philippines.
Shortly after the reading of the joint resolution of Congress, at exactly 12 noon, Marcos Jr. was sworn in by Supreme Court Chief Justice Alexander Gesmundo. In his more or less 25-minute inaugural address, Marcos Jr. echoed his campaign call for unity.
At pinakinggan ko ang tinig ninyo na ang sinisigaw ay pagkakaisa, pagkakaisa, pagkakaisa.
Marcos Jr. also believed that by focusing on the work that has to be done, the country will go very far under his watch.
Government will get as much done alone without requiring more from you. That is what government and public officials are for. No excuses, just deliver.
He then said that they're currently drawing up a comprehensive plan for economic transformation. This would focus on food sufficiency, education sector, energy supply, continuation of infrastructure programs, and the public health system. Marcos Jr. even highlighted his late father's accomplishment, but said that Filipinos should focus on the future instead.
I am here not to talk about the past. I am here to tell you about our future. A future of sufficiency.
Lastly, Marcos Jr. shared his hope and dreams with the Filipino people.
Ang pangarap nyo ay pangarap ko. At sa pangarap na maging mas masinan ang kinabukasan natin at ng ating mga anak, ang pangarap nyo ay pangarap ko.
Robbie, Gretchen, after the inauguration program, the traditional conteneur or diplomatic relation reception took place inside the National Museum. Likewise, newly appointed cabinet members took their oath before President Marcos at the Malacanang. Robbie, Gretchen.
Maraming salamat. That was mobile journalist Julie Baiza reporting to us live from Manila.
Newly sworn President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. did not waste time on his first day as he administers the oath of some of his cabinet appointees and several local officials right after his inauguration.
The day has not ended yet for Marcos Jr. He still has activities lined up tonight. Greg Gregorio has this report.
From the inauguration to the oath-taking of several government officials, it was a very busy first day for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. The first family left the National Museum past 3 p.m., following the Vandenor, where they faced the diplomatic community. They were also welcomed at the Malacanang with a 21-gun salute as part of the arrival honors. After taking up the palace's main staircase, the new president led the oath of several local officials of Ilocos Sur and Norte, including his son, Ilocos Norte 1st District Congressman Sandro Marcos.
When else will I be able to swear in as president? So, sinabi ko kay Sandro, dalhin mo silang lahat dito kahit na papano para masabi ko naman na sinampa ko ang aking anak na naging bagong congressman at lahat ng kasama natin dito.
But the activities for Marcos Jr. did not stop there. An inaugural dinner was slated at 7 p.m. at the Rizal Hall. While there are no details yet on the number of guests and the food that will be served, the camp of Marcos Jr. has confirmed that he will be wearing another Pepito Albert Barong. There will also be a concert tonight at 8:30 p.m. in Mendiola, where the president is expected to attend. Performers include world-renowned classical pianist Cecil Licad and Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra. Meanwhile, the first cabinet meeting will be held on Friday. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
Unity team supporters all over the country also took part in the celebrations. In Lawag, Ilocos Norte, a public viewing was set up for supporters. In Batak City, tricycle drivers stopped their trips to watch the ceremony at the Imelda Cultural Center. Of course, thousands flocked to the National Museum, some even dressed up for the occasion, while others said they came even from abroad. Some supporters said they had a hard time understanding Marcos Jr.'s speech, which was mostly in English, but for them, these new promises gave them good reason to hope for the next 6 years.
Dito, we call it Marcos country dito sa Ilocos Norte, and we all expect that President BBM will be a great president.
Lahat ng aspeto para umunlad ng ating bansa ay lahat na nabigyan ng emphasis ni BBM. At naniniwala kami kay BBM!
These are the other big stories tonight. After 6 years in office, Rodrigo Duterte steps down as president and returns to his life in Davao, where a homecoming concert waits for him. Former Camarines Representative Rolando Andaya was found dead in his home in Naga City. Family and friends now grieve for the untimely death of the lawmaker. And Gilas Pilipinas trails behind New Zealand's Tall Blacks in the first round of the FIBA Basketball World Cup Asian qualifiers. These big stories after the break.
You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. Together with millions of Filipinos who witnessed the inauguration of the 17th president, hundreds of foreign dignitaries attended the oath-taking of Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
In his speech, President Marcos, like most presidents before him, addressed several public issues, but one key topic was missing: the fight against corruption. Marian Enriquez with this story.
Hundreds of local and foreign dignitaries attended President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr.'s oath-taking, including Australian Governor-General David Hurley, U.S. Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff, Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan, and Vietnamese Vice President Vo Tin Anh Xuan. After the inauguration, the traditional Von d'honneur was held at the old session hall of the National Museum. This serves as the official toast.
May God bless you, Mr. President. Mabuhay. 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 And to toast to the strengthening of our continuing relationships between the Philippines and your country.
But apart from the toasts, the real focus of the day was on Marcos Jr.'s first words as president. According to columnist and policy advisor Professor Richard Hidarian, there were no surprises in his speech as it centered mainly on public issues like food security.
He sticks within a certain decorum, within a certain script, at the same time, may pagka-nostalgist din siya, no? The way he talks, katulad ng tatay na, di ba? I mean,
for Professor Antonio Contreras, his speech was his response to critics after skipping election debates.
Parang ginastify niya rin yung kung bakit hindi siya umaattend ng mga debate. Di ba? Kasi hindi siya nagsalita masyado, nakikinig siya.
Attorney Edwin Lacerda, former spokesperson of President Noynoy Aquino, meanwhile commended Marcos Jr.'s speech but noted he has set the bar high.
Maganda yung pagkalatag ng speech siya, well written. It touched on almost all the topics that he intended to do in his 6 years. Medyo high bar, mataas ang standard that he imposed on himself, no? Ang unang concern niya, economic recovery. Sinabi niya na gagandang ekonomiya natin. Ang laking problema natin ngayon sa economy, primarily because we're coming from a pandemic, there's an expectation of a global recession. May away sa Ukraine, which he mentioned, by the way. And so maraming bagay sa economy na maapektuhan.
But what's noticeable for him is how PBBM made no mention of the fight against corruption.
I think in each inaugural speech, hindi nawawala ang paglaban sa corruption. Here, it was very, very clear na parang, absent si corruption sa pag-uusap.
It's all eyes on how Marcos Jr. and his administration will be able to address all these issues in the next 6 years. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Post-EDSA, no Filipino president has claimed an overwhelming majority of votes like Marcos Jr. How will the new president sustain his popularity? That big question and more with former Ateneo School of Government Dean and political analyst Attorney Tony Laviña. Attorney Laviña, welcome to The Big Story.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Thank you for
Dean Tony, I'm sure just like everybody else, you watched the inaugural speech. How did it hit you? Your thoughts on the words of President Bongbong Marcos?
I thought it was a good speech, hit the right notes, the right issues. Not complete, as was pointed out earlier, corruption, human rights were not highlighted. It was in English mostly. But there were parts in Filipino. The sound bites in Filipino were intended for his mass supporters. Very noticeable to me, very different in two ways from previous inaugural speeches. No call for a sacrifice for Filipinos. No call for participation for. Well, there was participation, collaboration, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. He said, we'll do their job anyway. So very clear top-down approach to governance that we haven't seen for a long time in this country. And here I would really commend President Marcos, Robbie. True to the word, walang atake sa kalaban, both political rivals and also people that usually attack, right? People who are corrupt, people who are communists, people who are drug addicts. I mean, I always thought that President Estrada, who of course invoked a class war, di ba? Mayaman at mahirap. President Aquino, corrupt versus the not corrupt. Wangwang. President Duterte about the addicts, di ba? At the time, hindi pa na niya inaawa yung mga komunista. Kasi I always felt that was in bad taste in an inaugural speech. And here clearly stayed away from that and consistent with that. So those two things really were very different from other inaugural speeches.
Dean Tony, dun sa isang sinabi mo, no call for participation. In fact, his words were, it seems to be a very deliberate word. We will work alone and try to do as much as we can. You put it as, a very top-down approach. Some people, however, will also frame it as, not only the inclusive, but not quite the participatory governance that that is also being idealized. But what would a top-down approach mean on the ground in terms of style, in terms of impact, in terms of risks as well?
Yeah, we'll see, but it actually means delivery. We will deliver, and alam mo, that was really intended for his mass supporters, no? I think he still expects the rich and the political class to deliver, to support whatever, right? But for the poor, you don't have to do anything because we will take care of you. So very patronizing, actually, very patron-client, and maybe the reason for that is that's the reason why he won in the first place, diba? Taking all of those promises. His father did not do that. The father invoked all the time the need to everyone to join in the fight against for
Dean Tony. Dean Tony, we're almost out of time for this segment, but just one question. Between now and the State of the Nation address, we have a little less than a month. There are still some cabinet positions left to fill. No DOH secretary yet, among other things. What else should we expect to be accomplished in this first week, and for this matter, in this first month?
The appointments have to be completed, right? Aside from DFA, no Department of Health, which is very important, and no DENR, which obviously is very, very important. The laying down of policies have to be clear. They have to develop all of that because they don't have that. They didn't have that in the campaign. They'll have now to develop that and present that in the third Monday of July during SONA. Yun ang priority sa tingin ko. But some really dramatic things like release of Senator De Lima, recall of the NTC order against media organizations, maybe some rapprochement with Rappler, for example. Those will be very good steps, I think, of the new administration if they really mean unity.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Attorney Tony Lavinia. Away from the National Museum, protesters flocked to the historic Plaza Miranda while the inauguration was being held. About 1,000 protesters from progressive groups voiced their concerns to the new administration. These include the rising cost of fuel and other basic commodities. They also took a jab at Marcos Jr.'s plan to slash the price of rice per kilo to 20 pesos. They say it's impossible so long as the rice tariffication law is there. Bayan Secretary General Renato Reyes says this inauguration is not a day of celebration but of mourning. As the Marcoses' return to Malacanang is a step backwards, he said, to recovering their ill-gotten wealth.
Kaya wala pang pagdiriwang sa atin ngayon. Pagluluksa meron. Kahit na ilang ulit nyo pang patugtugin ang bagong lipunan, hindi nyo mabubura ang katotohanan at ang kasaysayan.
For the big story in sports, Gilas Pilipinas suffered another blowout loss in the hands of the New Zealand Tall Blacks in their first game of the third window of the FIBA World Cup Asia qualifiers 106-60. Bringing only an 11-man roster due to injuries, Gilas struggled against the towering Kiwis. Carl Tamayo was the lone bright spot for Gilas with 16 points and 5 rebounds. Renz Abando added 11 points while Dwight Ramos chipped in 6 points and 9 rebounds. Gilas, which is now 1-2 in Group A, hopes to bounce back against India here in Manila on Sunday. Time for another quick break. More of the big stories when we return.
You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. Earlier today, now former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte received his departure honors in Malacanang. This after he welcomed successor President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
And after 6 years of being president, Rodrigo Duterte is now back in Davao as a private citizen. For the latest updates, we have Jem Avancenia reporting to us on the phone from Davao. Jem, kamusta dyan?
Hi, Gretchen and Robbie. President Rodrigo Duterte arrived in Davao International Airport around 6:57 p.m. tonight, wherein he was welcomed with water gun salute. Earlier today, Duterte stepped down as the 16th President of the Philippines. He also received his departure honors in Malacanang after welcoming his successor and now President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. After the meeting, they skipped the traditional car ride to the inauguration venue as Duterte opted not to attend the ceremony. It was around 4 o'clock when Duterte arrived in the Ninoy Aquino International Airport for his flight back home. But before that, Duterte was also seen strolling in a mall in Greenbelt where he was greeted by supporters. Before Duterte's last day in office, his party, PDP Laban, organized a Thanksgiving event. And here in Davao, he is set to attend a homecoming concert organized by supporters in NCCC Mall BB parking area tonight. And as of this time, we are following his convoy on his way to the concert venue. And in an interview, Duterte said he can now finally rest, sleep as long as he can, go anywhere with his motorcycle, and read more books. Robbie, Gretchen?
Maraming salamat, Jem Avancenia. Former House Majority Leader Camarines Representative Rolando Andaya Jr. passed away at the age of 53. His children, Ranton and Katrina, announced the news on their Facebook page. According to police, Andaya's personal assistant found him lying in his bedroom in Naga City. Reports say a gunshot was heard inside the residence and Andaya had a wound on his head. The family has yet to officially disclose the cause of Andaya's untimely death. The former lawmaker ran for governor in Camarines Sur in the recently held elections, but lost to his opponent, Luigi Villafuerte. Fresh out of Malacanang, former President Rodrigo Duterte went to the mall.
Private citizen Duterte caused quite a stir in Greenbelt 5 as folks flocked to have their pictures taken with the former president. Duterte was still wearing the barong he wore when he received Marcos Jr. in Malacanang when he went to shop and have lunch in Greenbelt. Duterte, though, was still accompanied by members of the presidential security group.
Aside from President Duterte, it was also the final day in office for Vice President Leni Robredo. Robredo shared she had mixed emotions about spending her last day at the Quezon City Reception House. As she ended her term, her security detail requested one thing from Robredo, for them to blurt out their sirens for the first and last time, as Robredo refused the so-called wangwang all throughout her term.
Oh my God! Nag-e-enjoy po yung BPS nila. Oh my God! Oh my God! OA na! Hoy, Arts! Enjoy yarn.
What a way to reward yourself than with the simple things in life and the things you couldn't do for the past 6 years.
Yeah, we could imagine both for President Duterte and Vice President Leni Robredo going back to citizens Digong and citizen Leni. But, everything is prologue. We now watch this new administration. We're waiting. We have a month before the first State of the Nation address of President Bongbong Marcos. And in the meantime, we, of course, are quite eager to know what the plans are of these new citizens.
We'll dissect that for sure in the coming weeks. But I'm excited to see what you have to say about the speech later on the Chiefs.
Mamaya pag-uusapan natin yan. Mukhang mahaba-bang usapan niya. I don't think we will cover what's gonna happen in this administration. We will, of course, by definition, be covering for the next 6 years. Everything that we can do, we'll try to do our jobs. Just as President Bongbong Marcos said, he will try to do his job as best as he could.
Well, that wraps up today's eventful day and today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And get vaccinated, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good evening.